Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to this press conference of a very, very important issue. We are all aware of this problem of censorship and even worse, self-censorship, which is not an issue particularly of Japan. It's an issue that is unfortunately virusing around the world, including countries that didn't used to have this virus. Japan in particular has a sad history of abandoning irony, parody, satire. I believe the last case was in 1960 when famous author Fukazawa Shichiro wrote that very interesting and funny book, Furyu Mutan. After a few days, the Uyoku went to the house of his editor, Mr. Shimanaka of Chuokoron, and killed the maid and injured the wife. And since then, that poor writer, very famous writer, had to abandon the public and lived in almost in a hide for the rest of his life. I believe that that was kind of the funeral of the satire in Japan. Now we have another issue, the self-censorship. And we witnessed this very strongly during the Goto and the Haruna case in last December and now in January. And we have now 5 representatives, intellectuals, writers, journalists, former bureaucrat, 5 brave persons that have decided to come out and made statement and declaration about the dangers that self-censorship brings not only to freedom of speech, but to freedom tout court, because freedom of speech is one of the basic fundamental rights of mankind. Now, let me introduce our guest today, starting with our interpreter, Mary Joyce. Thank you very much for coming. Then, I'm sorry, but I don't see, okay. Kei Nakazawa, who is a novelist. Yes. Then Mr. Koga, Shigeaki, who is a former bureaucrat of METI. And we have Hirata Oriza, who is a playwright. Then Madame Amano, who is a famous cartoonist and parodist. I believe everybody remembers this was done during the Koizumi era, which is not so long ago. And then Imai Hajime, who is a journalist. So they will speak one by one, a very short statement, and then we will go into question and answer. So you start first. Okay.
Thank you, the media. Okay. はじめまして、今井でございます。
Good afternoon, my name is Imai.
時間に限りがありますので、声明をですね、読み上げている時間がないので、もうお手元に日本語と英語で言ってると思うんで、私たちがですね、この運動会を立ち上げたその趣旨は、皆さん方のお手元にある声明文に書いてある通りです。
And as our time today is limited, we have distributed our declaration in both Japanese and English to you today. And the background behind our movement and what we are doing now is listed within this declaration.
一言で言えば、日本の報道、言論、表現の場にですね、自粛と萎縮が大変なスピードではびこりつつある、それをせき止めようと、そういう動きです。
And to put very simply, the background or the reason for our movement for this declaration is the fact that the media and also expression here in Japan is at a very rapid rate, really going towards self-restraint and also external restraint or censorship.
で、その 声明文についてはですね、最後の一節だけ読み上げさせていただきます。最後の一節だけ。
I would like to read aloud just the final words, the final sentences from the declaration.
私たち言論表現活動に携わる者は、政権批判の自粛という悪しき流れに身を委ねず、この流れをせき止めようと考える。誰がどの党が政権を担おうと、自身の良心にのみ従い、批判すべきだと感じ、考えることがあれば、今後も臆さずに書き、話し、描くことを宣言する。
We, as people who exercise our right to freely express ourselves, now declare to resist at all costs the threat of conforming to self-restraint and avoiding criticizing the government. No matter what party holds the reins of government, each and every one of us will follow only our own consciences. We make a personal pledge to never hesitate about what we write, speak, draw, or otherwise create.
で、最後に宣言するという言葉で結んであるわけですけども、この宣言に名前を連ねた言論人、報道人、表現者は現在約2500人います。
And so this declaration ends with our personal pledge, or the word declare in Japanese. And at the moment, there are 2,500 writers, journalists, or artists who have signed on to this declaration.
で、皆さん方のお手元にはそのごく一部の方々のお名前と職業、日本語とそれからローマ字と両方で書いて、お手元にお配りしておりますのでご参考にしてください。
And within the documents distributed today, there is a page which has a sample of some of the people who have signed on to this declaration, with their names written in English and their professions or occupations are listed in Japanese together there also.
それでこういった動きを応援しようという人たちも2500人署名をしてくださっています。その人たちは言論人とか表現者じゃない一般の方なんですけども、応援しようという人も今2500人の方が署名をしてくださっています。
And in addition to the people listed here, or the writers and journalists who have signed on to this declaration, there is also around 2,500 members of the general public. So they themselves are not writers or journalists or artists, but who have signed on in support of this declaration.
見ていただいたら分かりますけれども、映画監督だけで13人、世界的に有名な原和夫とかヤン・ヨンヒとか、そういう方々の名前、是枝裕和さん、それから皆さんよくご存知の坂本龍一さん、そうした方々のお名前もあります。ただしですね、そういった著名な方だけではなくて、もう考えられるありとあらゆる、例えばポップアップアーティストですとか人形劇の制作者だとか、いろんな職業の人が今回名前を連ねてくださっています。
And within this list, we can see that even if we just look at the film directors, there are 13 people listed within this, including many world-renowned figures, such as Nakazawa and Koreeda Hirokazu, and of course, someone you are most likely all familiar with, Sakamoto Ryuichi. But not only such famous individuals, but also many other people, such as pop-up artists or doll theater creators and so on, are also listed within this.
で、一つですね、嬉しいのは、今問題になっている NHK とか、大手の新聞社の方もですね、勇気を持って名前を連ねてくださっています。NHK の場合はニュースを担当しているチーフプロデューサーが、本名で堂々と署名をしてくださっています。
And one thing which we are very pleased about is the fact that not only such individuals, but also people who are active in current roles within mainstream media, such as at NHK or in large newspapers here in Japan, have also been brave enough to list their real names as supporters of this declaration. For example, there is a chief producer of NHK News who has also listed himself within this group.
最後にもう一つの特徴は、これまでこういった運動をですね、日本で何か例えば原子力発電所の問題、沖縄の基地の問題、そういった社会運動に名前を連ねる人っていうのは大抵お決まり、いつも同じような人が名前を連ねてたんですけど、今回特徴的なのは普段そういうところに名前を記さない、連名しない、署名しない人たちがこぞって署名をしてくださっているということです。例えば後でお話があると思いますけど、今日ここに出席してくださっている小説家の中澤圭さんもそのお一人です。以上です、私の方から。
And one of the other characteristics to which I would like to bring your attention is the fact that, well, often in Japan there is a tendency for people who list their names as supporters of these issues, such as, well, other social issues like nuclear power issues or the Okinawan military base issues, often can be what would be called the usual suspects, the same people listing their names on such social movements. However, this time we can see many people, many intellectuals, artists and writers who are not necessarily active in such social movements, who have come forward as a group to really put their names together and sign on to this. And as we will hear later on from Ms. Nakazawa Kei, the novelist here, also is one of these figures, for example. That's all from me.
はい、じゃあこれで基本的な話が終わったんで、この後1人2分30秒ずつという時間を限られているみたいなんですが、順番にマッドさんからお話をさせていただきたいと思います。
So I would like to close my introduction here and from now pass on to the other four representatives here, and we will have 2.5 minutes from each of them to hear their comments. And first to Mr. Mad Amano.
じゃあ天野先生。
皆さんこんばんは。こんばんは。まだ昼か。こんにちは。
Good evening or rather good afternoon, everybody.
はっきり言って安倍政権は風刺が大嫌いな政権です。
To put it very simply, the Abe government, the Abe administration, really hates these kinds of parody characteristics.
皮肉なことにパリで起きたシャルリー・エブドの事件、あれに対して安倍さんは哀悼の意を表しました。
And one thing which is very ironic is following the Charlie Hebdo incident in Paris, Mr. Abe actually expressed his sorry for what had happened.
ということは、風刺を認めていなければ哀悼の意は表さないはずです。
Which of course is something which he could not do if he was not acknowledging the role of such work that the artist had been doing.
フランスの文化大臣ですかは、我が国は風刺を認めなかったらフランスの文化はありえないと言いました。
And the French, I believe it was the Minister of Culture, made a comment that if we as France, as a country, were not recognizing such work as these cartoonists, then this is something which, well, we would not be France, we would not have our culture.
それに対して日本の総理大臣は風刺が大嫌いです。
However, the Japanese Prime Minister hates such work.
今日は新しい作品を持ってきました。新作、どこにも発表していません。
I have brought a new work with me today, which I have not announced anywhere until now.
ちょっと見てください。ちょっとこう立ち上がって。これ古賀さんに今初めてお見せしてます。
And this is my first time to show this to Mr. Koga himself, actually.
I am not Abe ということを、古賀さんが公の場で言ったことが今大問題になっています。
And the fact that Mr. Koga in public in the media said, I am not Abe, is something which is being very controversial or raising a lot of discussion here in Japan.
で、この作品はもうご覧になってお分かりの通り、右側の黒い男はここにAbeって入ってますね。
And as you can see here, on my left-hand side, we can see the black sleeve with Abe written on it.
顔を出すとまた通告書をもらってしまうので、顔は出さなかったんですが。
If I put his face in the picture, of course, I would have warnings and so on from the government. So I haven't included the face in this image.
これはもうご覧の通り、古賀さんが人質になったような感じに仕上げました。
As you can see in this image, it is as if Mr. Koga himself is being, well, taken hostage.
しかも、口のところにガムテープ貼られてます。
And he has duct tape pasted over his mouth.
これは絶対に許してはいけないことです。
This is something which we must not allow.
そんなことで、風刺というものは、絶対に批評行為なので、風刺を認めない安倍政権を認めないわけにはいきません。どうも。
And so this is, well, such parody, such critical work is something which, well, we need to be critical about the Abe government not allowing this to happen. And we can't let this happen.
小川さん、すいませんでした。もう来てるわ。
じゃあ、Orizaさん。はい、バレちゃって。
劇作家の平田です。よろしくお願いします。
Good afternoon. I am Playwright Hirata Oriza.
演劇をやっているものですから、演劇の世界にはですね、ずっとリア王に象徴されるように道化というのが出てくるわけですね。
And of course, in the world of theater, which is the world that I am active in, we look at how these things are portrayed.
でこの道化っていうのは大体王様のそばにいてですね、普段はアホなことばっかり言ってるんですけど、周りの側近も言えないような、皮肉とかですね、批評をするというのが道化の役割なわけです。
And within this, it is also important to really see the role of, in the theater, in a very exemplary play which I made, for example, how when something is being said, there can be criticism or things raised, and this is part of the whole theater production.
しかし、それが過ぎるとですね、王様の勘に触ってすぐ首をちょんって跳ねられるのも道化の役割なわけですね。
And this is the role of the chorus to be bringing this up as part of the issue, but also as this passes, it's also their role to be really showing or highlighting the problems there too.
一応演劇をやってますので、首跳ねられるぐらいの覚悟はあるんですけれども、ただで跳ねられたくはないわけですよね。
And so, of course, being active in the theater world, you have to have the willingness or the preparation inside to be hung up for what you're doing, but it can't be too high, of course.
そして何よりも、演劇というのはお客さんを相手にしますので、その場を奪われたりするということが一番脅威なわけですね。
And of course, what is also most important in the theater is the fact that you are working with an audience. And so to ensure that you still have the audience with you is vital within theater.
すなわち今回のようにですね、マスコミとかですね、そのメディアとの広い意味でのですね、さまざまな媒体が私たちの表現の場を奪ってしまうということが、私たちにとっては一番脅威なわけです。
And for this reason, this is why, well, in the particular cases which we are seeing recently, if we look at media in a broad sense, what is most fearful, what we should be most concerned about, is the fact that this space for expression is being taken away.
日本の劇作家にはですね、戦前体制抑散に協力した不幸な歴史と反省があります。
And within the Japanese theater world, or the history of Japanese playwrights, there is, of course, the very unfortunate history of playwrights, theater workers who had been supporting the government regime in the period leading up to World War II.
戦前もですね、表現の場を、まさに人質に取られてですね、多くの演劇人が、戦争協力を行ったわけです。
Which is, of course, something regretful. And in this way, the space for expression was really taken away, and many artists and many playwrights and people involved in the theater were led to be supporting the war effort at this time.
そのような状態に追い込まれる前にですね、声を上げていきたいと思い、今日ここに参りました。
And so before things are taken hostage in the way that they were there, this is why I am participating in this movement and joining today to make sure that we stop this before it gets to that point, before it gets driven to being taken hostage in such a way.
よろしくお願いします。
Thank you very much.
よろしいですか。
Yes.
古賀です。よろしくお願いします。
My name is Koga. Hello.
今の日本の報道はですね、機能を失いつつあります。
The Japanese media today is really losing very much its quality.
で、現在は治安維持法もありませんし、特攻もないんですけれども、非公式な形でその報道の機能喪失というものがですね、かなり進んでいるというのが私の認識です。
And although today we do not have the same kinds of state security laws that were in place during wartime and so on, I think that many of the functions that these are serving are gradually becoming more and more progressing in today's society.
で、報道の機能という正しい機能が失われるとですね、独裁と戦争につながっていくというのは過去の歴史から私たちが学んだことだと思います。
And the fact that if media loses its true functions, this leads towards authoritarianism and war is something which we have learned from the past.
で、いろいろな表現の仕方があると思います。私はこの報道がですね、機能を失うことによって、独裁そして戦争へ進んでいく過程をですね、三段跳びになぞらえてホップ、ステップ、ジャンプということで表しています。
And of course, there are many ways to express this, but the words which I'm using to express the way that the media is losing its functions and going towards the direction of authoritarianism in war is 3 steps of the hop, step, and jump.
まずホップの段階は政府の側からマスコミに対して、圧力をかけたり、あるいは懐柔の手段を使って、自分たちの思うことを書かせ、あるいは 嫌なことを書かせないということをやろうということで、政権の側からイニシアティブを取るというのがホップですね。
And so the first step, the hop, is when there is governmental pressure on media using methods, for example, to force media to write certain things or also to not write things which are critical in a particular way. So this is an initiative from the governmental side, from the state.
そしてステップの段階に入ると、そうした日常的な政府からのですね介入にだんだん慣らされてしまった報道機関の方が、自らトラブルをですね避ける、あるいは政権にすり寄ってですね権力の側にいるという利権をですね享受するということのためにですね、自ら正しいことを書かない、政府批判をしないというふうにセルフコン自己抑制をしてしまう、自粛してしまうと、これが要するに報道機関の側からそういう動きになってしまうというのがステップの段階です。
And the next stage, the step, is when the media becomes used to the kinds of daily intervention coming from the government. In order to avoid trouble, they start to themselves, write things which are in the interest of authority, for example, or not write the truth, not write things which are critical of the government. So self-control by the media itself as the second step.
で、現在はそこまで、日本の状況はですね進んでいるというふうに思っていますが。
And I believe the Japanese situation today has reached this stage of the step.
これが進むとですね、正しい情報が国民に伝わらない。
However, if we get to this, then the correct information, the truth, is not conveyed to the public.
したがって、民主主義の大前提であるですね、国民の知る権利というのが失われていくことによって、国民が正しい判断ができなくなるということにつながります。
And this leads to what is a fundamental right of citizens as part of a democracy, is the right to know, is being taken away from the people, meaning that they also lose the capacity to make correct judgments by themselves.
で、その結果ですね、最終的には選挙という最も民主的な手段、手続き、最も民主的であるはずのですね、選挙という手続きを経て独裁政権が誕生すると。
And as a result of this, it means that through what should be the most democratic process that there is, the election, this actually leads to an authoritarian government being elected.
来年の参議院選挙で、自民党ないし与党が3分の2を取るのかどうかというのが、一つのポイントになってくるかもしれませんが、その最後のステップの段階というのはですね、そんなに遠くない可能性があるというふうに思っております。以上です。
And so looking towards the election to be taking place next year, it will be a point of whether, the LDP and the current government is having a two-thirds majority at this point, and this will really bring us closer to this final jump stage. Thank you.
いいですか。皆様こんにちは、中澤圭です。
Good afternoon. My name is Nakazawa Kei.
先ほど署名にはあまり顔を出さない作家だというふうにご紹介いただきました。
I was just introduced as a novelist who does not usually put my name to such declarations as this.
小説家としてはあまり署名に協力することはないのですが、一般的な市民としては保育料の値上げをやめてくださいとか、イラク戦争には反対ですとか、そういった署名にはよく協力しています。
And while as a novelist, this might be true that I do not often join such declarations and so on, as one individual citizen, I am often signing declarations or also supporting such movements, for example, against the Iraq war or also against the increase of expenses for early childhood education and so on.
私が今回、表現者という表題を掲げたこの署名に協力いたしましたのは、2つの大変に危惧する点があるからでございます。
The reason for which I decided to put my name to this declaration as a writer is because of two main concerns.
一つはですね、ネット情報を得ている人々と、従来のテレビや新聞というメディアから情報を取っている人々の間で、非常に大きな乖離がこの日本という社会で生まれています。
And the first reason for this is that there is a very large gap being made between those people within Japanese society who gain most of their information from the internet and those who gain it from traditional sources such as the television and newspapers.
その端的な例を一つ申し上げます。
I would like to give a simple example of this.
この外国人記者クラブで、山谷恵理子参議院議員を招いて、国家公安委員長に就任された時の記者会見が行われました。
And the example is actually from here at the FCCJ when the Minister Yamatani Eriko gave a press conference here in her role as the chair of the Security Committee.
その様子はネットで中継されておりましたので、私も自宅で見ていました。
And this was being broadcast live on the internet, so I was actually watching the live broadcast from home myself.
山谷恵理子参議院議員は在特会と呼ばれるレイシストのグループから支持されていることがその段階で分かっていました。
And at that stage, it was known that the Diet member Yamatani had a connection with the Zaitokkai, which is known as a racist organization.
この今日とても静かに私の話を聞いてくださっている皆さんから怒鳴り声に近いような質問が飛んだのを記憶しております。
And I remember that, well, today we are here and you are all listening to my speech now very quietly, but watching this live stream, we could see many journalists even raising their voices and almost yelling in their questions and so on at this press conference.
ご承知のように、今の国会ではヘイトスピーチ規制法が議論されることになっています。
And as you are no doubt aware, currently in the Diet there is discussion about bringing in a law to restrict hate speech.
規制法を議論する中で、関係省庁のトップの一人である山谷さんが在特会の支持を受けているというのは大変まずい状況だと私は考えます。
And I believe that it is, of course, a very troubling situation where the person who is leading one of these agencies, which is involved in discussion about whether we should introduce restrictions on hate speech, is herself connected with one of these groups.
で皆さんはここの記者会見の様子を、記事にしてくださったり、テレビ番組にして流してくださったりしていただきました。
And I'm sure many of the members here who joined this press conference were writing articles about this, reporting on television and so on.
ところが、これを日本の新聞もテレビも全く報道しなかったんです。
However, this was not reported at all within the Japanese newspaper and television.
これは一体どういうことなんだと、疑問を持たざるを得ません。
And so we must question what this means.
それが古賀さんのおっしゃる自粛あるいは自主規制というものかもしれません。
And I think this comes down to the self-control or self-restraint to which Mr. Koga was referring.
私が最初に申し上げましたネット情報に接する人々とテレビや新聞といった従来のメディアに接する人々の間に情報の大きな格差が生まれているという危惧はこれを一つの例にしたいと思います。
And so I would like to introduce this as one of the examples of the great divide, the large division between people who have access to internet information and those who rely solely on traditional sources of media, such as the television and newspaper.
2つ目の危惧はですね、これはネットを使う人々の間で行われている実に乱暴な行為です。
And the second concern is in regards to very rough or almost violent methods which is being used by people online.
この2つ目の危惧については大変無礼ですがスラングを使うことをお許しください。
And please excuse me for using some slang when I'm sharing this example.
ネット右翼とか自民党のサポーターを自称するネットサポとかっていう人たちが、情報を取ろうとする人たちの邪魔をしたり、場合によっては勤務先に大量のファックスを送りつけたり電話をしたりして業務の妨害を行っています。
And we are seeing cases of this online wall, so-called net yoku, the net right wing, the online right wing, or supporters of the government, the administration, and so on, obstructing those who are trying to obtain information. For example, by sending masses of faxes or telephone addresses to people's places of work, to people's offices, obstructing them from their daily work and so on, in this way to prevent this access to information.
日本のメディアの萎縮あるいは自粛と言われるものは、政権からのプレッシャーだけではなく、こうしたネットユーザーからの極めて犯罪的なプレッシャーも関わっているものというふうに考えています。
And the control or restraint which is being put into place or implemented by much of the Japanese media is not only coming as a result of pressure from the government, but also pressure from such net users, which I believe to be criminal.
私はですね、以上の2点をもってなんとかネットの中に広がっている現状の報道に対する危機感をネットを使わない人々にも気づいていただきたいというふうに願っております。ご清聴ありがとうございました。
And so I have raised these 2 points today, these 2 concerns, also to bring awareness or attention to the fact that these kinds of issues of what is happening within the online discussion and so on should also be issues raised for people who are not having access to such online discussions, but also to those with the mainstream media as well. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm very happy because despite all the trouble and the worries about Jishuku, nobody is Jishuku. So, very good. Congratulations. Nobody respected the 2.5 minutes. Okay, so we are now open for the floor. So please, the working place first. Come to the microphone and state your name and, if you have one, your affiliation. And please address a question to one individual, because otherwise we will run out of time with everybody answering every question. Thank you. So I'll do the first one just to, until the others will make their question. Abroad, at least, but even in Japan, the focus is on the constitutional reform that Mr. Abe wants to do, and everybody is concerned about Article 9. But I believe this is a kind of a mistake, and that the Japanese press should also worry about other changes. For example, Article 12, Article 21. I've read the draft of the Jiminto. And for example, the freedom of expression will be reduced, and situations like during the war are possible again. For example, you could not go against the government policies, against the government interest. You should cooperate. I see here you used a very important expression, which is the Yoksan Taisei. So, in your opinion, are these changes in the Constitution as dangerous as Article 9 or even more? Because Article 9, after all, it's something de facto already happened. I mean, they are going to formalize, to stamp on a change that is de facto there. But this one is really, really dangerous, don't you think so? So maybe Imai-san, as a journalist, could you answer this question? Are you concerned by the fact that if this article will change, you would not be able to write against the formal Japanese government policy? Or in case of a nuclear catastrophe, like in Fukushima, you will have to abide to, to rules by the government.
はい、それでは質問、日本語に訳させていただきます。憲法についての質問なんですけれども、海外では少なくとも9条の、改憲についての報道、そして懸念がいろいろされていると思うんですけれども、9条以外にもですね、12条ですとか21条についても改憲されるということで、非常に、懸念しなければいけないというふうに私は考えています。で、少なくとも海外の報道では9条に焦点を当てることが、傾向があるんですけれども、それ以外の安倍そして自民党が提案されていることについて非常に表現の自由ですとかそういったことに非常に危険な方向にいってしまうことがあり得ると思います。そしてまた戦争の当時と同じような方向にいってしまうことが残念ながらまた可能になってくると思うんですけれども、で皆様の声明の中にもその抑散体制という言葉も使っていると思うんですけれども、9条以外の今自民党が提案している憲法の憲法改憲の方の ことというのは救助よりも危険なものがあるというふうにお考えでしょうか。救助の方またすでにその解釈の問題がすでに通ってしまっているということもありますので、それ以外の会見についてぜひ今井さんの方からコメントをお願いいたします。
OK、おっしゃる通りで、日本国憲法3つの要素がありますよね。平和主義、基本的人権の尊重、国民主権。これがですね、条文は確かにあるんですが、実態はかなり崩れているというのが事実だと思います。
I believe that, yes, as you say, it is very much as you say. There are three main points within the Japanese constitution: pacifism, fundamental or basic human rights, and also the sovereignty being with the people. However, when we look at the preface, we can see that this is somewhat there, but when we look at the content of what is being discussed at the moment, this is starting to already be crumbling or destroyed.
もう皆さんよくご存知のように、9条については、9条という条文があるにもかかわらず、内閣が解釈会見で集団的自衛権の行使を容認しようとしていますが、ことは9条だけではないと思っています。
And well, of course, as you know, in regards to Article 9, there was the cabinet decision which has led to different interpretation leading towards allowing the right to the use of collective self-defense. However, other than this, I think there is also points which we should be very concerned about.
日本国民は言論表現の自由が認められていますが、その事実は企業の中、それはこの企業というのはメディアということだけじゃなくて、それは自動車業界でもそうだし、繊維業界でもそうだし、およそ企業の中で言論表現の自由が完全に認められているかっていったらそうではないし、それがメディアの世界にまで及んできているのが今の実態だと思っています。
And of course, the Japanese people, according to the constitution, are guaranteed freedom of expression. However, when we look at the reality of the current situation, and this is not only the media, but also in broader corporations, for example, even in the automobile industry or manufacturing industry, is the freedom of expression really being truly fulfilled? And I don't think this is the case. And the fact that this is spreading even to the field of media is something which is of great concern.
そして最も危険なのは、政治権力の手によってだとか、企業の経営者の手によってそれが押さえつけられているというだけではなくて、先ほどから言っている自粛と萎縮、自分たちの方で言論表現の自由を放棄するようになってしまっている。で、その流れが急速に今加速しているんじゃないかというふうに私たちは考えています。で、この問題については私だけじゃなくて、今日は平田織田さんも中澤圭さんもおられるんで、ぜひですね、お二人のお話も聞いてみてください。以上です。
And what I believe is most dangerous within this situation is not only the fact that, for example, governments or corporations are bringing such restrictions or not allowing the full fulfillment of the freedom of expression, but the fact that there is this self-control or self-restraint, which we have been talking about, people even themselves abandoning this right, which should be guaranteed. And the fact that this is really rapidly expanding here in today is of great concern. I hope to also ask Mr. Orita and also Ms. Nakazawa to perhaps make a comment on this point.
テレビ新聞でビルニュース、日本語で質問いたします。今回自粛萎縮を、とにかくしないようにということなんですが、皆さんに伺いたいのはですね、なぜそのような自粛萎縮がそれぞれの分野で行われるような事態を招いているのか、具体的にそれぞれの実際の当事者たちにどのような不都合が生じる、あるいは生じている、あるいは生じかねないので皆さん批判をすることをやめてしまっているのか、もし具体的なものがあるんであれば、それこそ皆さんそれぞれの分野でご同僚がなんかみんな自粛してるっていうことであればですね、なんだかそれとももう本当漠然とした空気の支配みたいなレベルのものなのか、ちょっとぜひそこをどなたでももしご意見があれば結構ですのでお願いします。
じゃあ僕から一つ
ちょっと英語に訳させていただきます。To translate the question, my name is Jimbo, and I would like to ask all of you within your own fields and your own expertise, what you think is leading to such control or external control also happening within your own fields and work? What kind of inconveniences, for example, or difficulties arise in the current situation or potentially in the future as well? Why people are stopping such criticism and so on? I would like to ask whether you have some concrete examples of what is bringing about such a situation, or if it is something to do with more of a ambiguous or vague atmospheric issue which is leading to this as well from anyone. Thank you.
今回テレビに現在出演しているジャーナリスト何人かからですね、私の知人友人からですが、この声明に賛同して署名をしたいけども、そうすると3月のあるいは3月から4月にかけての番組改編の時に職を失う、ポストを失う、そうすると収入が一気に減ってしまう、その可能性が強いので署名ができないという人が3人私にメールと電話をくださいました。ことはそれだけではない、いっぱいありますけど、とりあえず私は非常に皆さんもよくご存知の日常的にテレビで見ている3人からそういうメールと電話が私のところにあったという事実、そして古賀さんは現実に間もなく報道ステーションをコメンテーターの仕事をですね降ろされます。そのことはご本人からぜひ聞いてください。
Of course, there are many examples which I could introduce, but to give one in particular relation to this declaration. At the time of asking or calling for people to sign on to this declaration, I received emails or telephone calls from 3 journalists who are currently regularly appearing on television as commentators and so on the news. People you would see every day on the news who told me that they would like to sign on to this declaration, but if they did, at the time of the television programs and so on being in their renewal stage in March and April, they would most likely or have a very high risk of losing their posts, which would lead to a sudden or extreme decrease in income at this time as well. So this is from 3 specific people who you are probably familiar with, would see very regularly, who are really experiencing this as well. And Mr. Koga himself also is very soon to be losing his position as a commentator on Hodo Station, the regular news program as well. So perhaps you can hear from him also.
古賀さん。
はい、ですね、もうさっき私が申し上げた通り、何が起きているかっていうとですね、政権は常にマスコミをコントロールしようとするんですね。それは過去の政権でも同じだと思います。で、日本の場合いくつか特徴があってですね、一つは記者クラブ制度っていうのがあるんですね。
Well, as I mentioned before, when we are looking at the current situation of what is happening now, well, it is not something new for governments to be trying to control the media. This is, of course, something which previous administrations would also do, but there is a particular characteristic of Japan, which is the press club system.
そしてほとんどの大手のですね、新聞やテレビ局というのは必ず各役所あるいは自民党のクラブとか民主党のクラブというような形でそれぞれの組織ごとに記者クラブというのがあって、そこに所属をしていると。そしてそこに所属するとですね、記者会見、その組織が行う記者会見に参加ができる。逆に言うとその外にいる人はそこから排除されると、そういう仕組みになっています。でしたがってそのクラブにいるとですね、大体周りの人たちといつも一緒にいますから、どの会社が何をしようとしているのかというのはお互いに見ながら、かなりの程度その組織から出てくる発表、公式発表に依存しながら記事を書くという仕組みになっているんですね。
And so within the mainstream television or newspapers in Japan, they have, of course, reporters which are attached to the press clubs of each of the government agencies, for example, or the parties as well, the LDP, DPJ, and so on. So they are attached to these institutional press clubs, and it is only those who are members of this who can attend the press conferences which are held by the agencies or the party and so on as well. Those journalists, those members of the media who are outside of this are excluded from being able to attend the press conferences. But this means, of course, those of you who, or those people who are within a press club are always moving together, always within the same everyday situation, always joining the same meetings and so on, which means they're aware of what each other is doing, and also means that they are relying on the official announcements from that party, from that agency and so on for their reporting.
でそうするとですね、結局現場の記者というのはそこの記者クラブの中で ある程度協調的な行動を取っていかないと、その、政府の組織とかですね、そういうところから情報を非常に得にくくなると。一社だけ例えば特ダネが書けなかったというようなことが起きるという、そういう仕組みに陥るわけですね。
And this means that for those journalists working in the field, if there is a need for them to in some way work within the club, the system, work within the other press and also officials there as well. And if they are not doing this, then this means that they may find it harder, for example, to obtain particular information, or also harder to get the particular news and so on, which is being released there.
で、そうするとですね、そこの現場の記者はですね、あまり政府に悪いニュースをですね、書きたくなくなるというのが一つ。それから、例えば官邸とかですね、あるいは自民党の与党平川町のクラブとかで、取材をしている記者から見るとですね、その自分が所属している会社の新聞とかですね、あるいはテレビがですね、政権批判をした場合に自分がその取材をしにくくなるということを心配することがあります。これは特にテレビ局に非常に強いんですね。テレビ局では自分の書いた記事がそのまま例えば政治部の記事となる、経済部の記事となるということだけじゃなくて、報道ステーションの記事ニュースになるというようなこと、2、3のニュースになるというようなことが起きるんですけれども、そこのトーンがですね、非常に政府に批判的だと、せっかく例えば自民党やですね、官邸では官房長官とかですね、自民党の幹部からせっかくいい情報を教えてやったのになんだということを日常的に文句を言われるようになるんですね。そうすると自分が将来取材をしにくくなるということで、今度番組に圧力を記者がかけるようになると、あるいは経済部政治部がそんなことをニュースでやられると、自分たちが取材しにくくなるからそこまでは書かないでくれという、これがもう毎日行われてるんですね。
And for example, for those journalists who are working in the field, this leads to them not wanting to write information which is critical for the government or critical against the government, for example, because it will make their own jobs more difficult to do. For example, a journalist who would be attached to the press club for the cabinet or the LDP, for example, if their articles or their newspaper is critical of the government, this will make it much more difficult for them to do reporting, for them to obtain information to be able to publish things from then on as well. And this is a characteristic which is particularly difficult for television in Japan, because it is not only according to the different departments, for example, the economics department or social political departments and so on, but also particular programs. So if a particular program is taking a critical stance, then there may also be criticism not only from the government, but also from other parts within their own company, within other things as well. So for example, pressure from a different department on a journalist to not do things in such a critical way because it is making things difficult for them to obtain information, for them to be reporting as well. And this kind of thing is happening on a daily basis within the media here.
で、そういう戦いがですね、日夜会社の中で行われていくとですね、番組を作る人たちはですね、もう面倒くさくなっちゃうんですね。もう時間との競争で仕事をしてます。もう1時間以内、2時間以内にビデオをまとめなくちゃいけない、ナレーションを作んなくちゃいけないという時にですね、政治部とか経済部からいちいちチェックが来てですね、これはやめろ、あれはやめろ、あるいはこういうふうに書けということがどんどん圧力としてかかってくるんで、それに対応していく時間というのはものすごくロスになるので、そんなことになるんだったら最初から、そういうクレームが来ないように書こうと、それが仕事をスムースに進める、コツだというようなことになります。
And within such a struggle existing within the everyday situation for the media and within particular companies, for example, they're also under the pressures, of course, of time and competition in getting out the news as well. They have 1 hour, 2 hours to edit the video, to put the narration on, to produce the final item to be broadcast. And if they are dealing with phone calls and checks coming in from other departments, from the economic division, the political division, and so on, the time having to deal with such comments, such checks, such complaints, and so on, makes it difficult for them to produce what they need to be doing. And so this means that in a way to make their own work smoother, to not have to deal with such hassles from the start, they begin to make programs which will not lead to such complaints, which will be seen safer, shall we say.
それからもう一つですね、いいですか、もう一つ今の政権のというか今の状況に特徴的なのは、各社のトップがですね、 安倍政権にすり寄っちゃってるっていう状況があるんですね。これが過去には非常に珍しい、過去と比べるとですね、珍しい状況だと思います。
And one other characteristic of the current situation is that many of the tops of these media outlets are also in a position very close to the Abe government, which is something which in past administrations has not been seen in such a way.
でトップがですね、安倍政権支持だっていうことは明確になっているとですね、当然その下の役員クラスとかですね、そういう人たちはそのサラリーマンですので、あんまり安倍政権に下がらない方が出世できるなという、もう報道とかなんとかと全然違うレベルでですね、安倍批判を控えたいというふうになります。現場じゃなくてですね、上の方が。そしてその結果ですね、下の方はどう考えるかというと、今までは例えば政権からいろんなクレームが来たときにですね、そんなのほっとけということができたんですね、ある程度。要するにそれは自分たちが正しいと思ったことを報道すればいいんだという、一番当たり前な報道の姿勢というのを取れたんですけれども、それがだんだんですね、それをやるとですね、上から怒られるということが起きます。例えば私が「I am not 安倍」ということを発言したときに何が起きたかといったら、プロデューサーが報道局長とかですね、政治部長に呼ばれて吊るし上げになるわけですね。でそんなことを年中やられたらですね、仕事にならないわけです。でそういうことが起きて、それはなぜかというと、トップが安倍にすり寄ってるからなんです。トップが別に中立だというふうに分かっていれば、その政権からクレームが来ても、そんなのは言ってることがおかしいから無視すればいいと、それで済むんですけれども、トップが安倍支持だということがはっきり分かって、一緒にご飯食べたりゴルフしたりして、携帯電話の番号をもらって喜んでいるという会長がいるんですね、実際に。もう驚くべきことですけれども、そうなっているとですね、もう下の方は戦おうと思っても戦えない状況になっているということですよね。
And within this situation, if those who are at the top of such media outlets are clearly in support of Abe and his administration, this means that also those mid-level company workers, the officials and so on, not necessarily the reporters in the field, but they are of course wanting to please their bosses, to also go according to the company line and to also have promotions to do well within the company. And so this means that in this way they will also be looking at, well, not putting things within the reporting which would put them in a difficult position within the company as well. So this means that in the past, for example, if this were not the case, if there was criticisms from the government, they could be, well, dealt with or ignored in the way believing that the reporting and the content and getting the truth out was more important. However, because of these internal pressures, because of very clear positions of support for Mr. Abe and his government within the top of media outlets, this is meaning it's very difficult. For example, in my personal case where as a commentator on the news program, I said, I am not Abe. What happened after that was the producer of that program was called by the head of the political department and so on, and really given a whole ring through about this situation. And it's very difficult for them to work in such a situation, of course. So when it's very clear that the top is supporting Abe, it means that the way that the journalism can work and also the mid-level way the company can work is changed in a great way as well. If it's known very clearly that there is a neutral position at the top of the company, of course, you can go forward with more criticism of the government and ignore if any claims or complaints are coming through. But when there is a situation where the bosses of these media companies are going and playing golf with Prime Minister Abe, going for dinner, having meals with him, exchanging mobile phone numbers and being pleased about this. This means that it's very difficult for those people working in the field, working in the midway, to actually be able to do their jobs.
Koga-san, just one follow-up on this, because your case is maybe very important for the future of Japan. I mean, could you tell us officially, publicly, whether you have been sacked from your job?
一つ追加の質問なんですけれども、古賀さんのケースというのも非常に今後の日本について非常に重要なケースだと思いますので、この場ではっきりと今からその報道ステーションの方はどういった立場でもしクビになられたのか、そしてどういった理由が言われているのかについてもしこの場ではっきり言っていただければお願いいたします。はい、
ですね、またこれ間違えるとですね、いろいろと大変なことが起きますので、これは怒られるといってもテレビ朝日から怒られるだけなので、菅さんに怒られるんじゃないんであんまり怖くはないんですけれども、正確に言うとですね、私とテレビ朝日の間で特に何て言うんでしょう、年に何回出演してくださいという契約があるわけではありません。ですからテレビ朝日の立場から言えば、その時でお願いをしているので、別に何かクビにするとかそういうものではないということですけれども、 私が聞いているのはですね、もちろんそのじゃあ来週誰を呼ぶのか、あるいは来月誰を呼ぶのかっていうのは、各番組のプロデューサー中心に決めるわけですが、私の場合はちょっといろいろ忙しいので3ヶ月ぐらい先まで決めるんですね。今までですから、基本的には毎月1回出てくださいという話がベースにあって、じゃあ具体的な日程は2ヶ月3ヶ月先にまで決めましょうということだったんですけれども、明確にですね、もともと去年から報道局長が私の出演を嫌がっているという話があったということは聞いておりましたけれども、もうこの間1月23日の発言以降はですね、4月以降は絶対出すなという言命が下っているというふうに、私は報道局長に直接言われてないので、直接聞いてみたいなとは思いますけれども、そういうふうになっている、それはもちろんトップの意向を反映してのものだというふうに私は理解しています。
理由は
そこまで先に訳させていただきます。すいません。Of course, I don't want to put myself in a difficult position here by making a mistake with what I'm mentioning here. But of course, it's only Asahi Television which will be the one who's getting angry at me, so I don't have to be too scared. In my case, I do not have a clear contract with Asahi Television about annually how many times I will appear on the program and so on. And so from the television company's perspective, it could be said, well, because I am appearing on a case-by-case basis, this is meaning that there is no way that I could be fired from the program, for example. But what I have heard and the way that things are working within the way that the programs are produced is that, the different producers of the programs will come together and say, well, who is appearing next week, next month, and so on. And these are generally planned around 3 months ahead in my case because of a busy schedule and so on. Generally, last year and so on, I've appeared on average around once a month, and the concrete program schedule for this is decided around 2 to 3 months in advance. But I have heard already from last year that the head of broadcasting was already not so positive about my appearing on the program. However, because of my statements made on January 23rd on the program, I have been told indirectly that there is a clear order for me not to be appearing from April of this year. Of course, I have not heard this from the head of broadcasting myself, so I hope for an opportunity to ask directly, but that's the current situation, and the question is why.
補足しますと、なぜ4月からかというと、3月までもう日程が決まっていたんですね、私が出演するという、3月は6日と27日に出演する予定ですけれども、さすがにそれをキャンセルすると、おそらく皆さんから非常に大きな批判が出るだろうということで、4月以降決まっていなかったので、4月以降、出演禁止ということだと思います。
And the reason for this being in April is because the schedule for my appearances on the program in March had actually already been set. So for March 6 and 27. And if these were to be cancelled, things which had already been confirmed, this would of course bring attention to the situation and likely also cause for criticism. However, the schedule was not concretely decided for April, so I believe this is why the order for me not to be appearing was done from that time.
テレビ朝日の昨日の社長会見では、記者の方から聞いたんですけれども、私の出演について別に何も決まっていることは何もないというふうに社長はおっしゃったそうですし、それから官邸からは一切圧力を受けているとは承知していないというふうに何回か聞かれてもそういうふうに言い張ったそうです。
And the press conference, which was given by the president of Asahi Television yesterday, and I heard from a journalist who was present there, said that in regards to my appearance on the program, nothing has yet been decided. And in regards to whether there had been any pressure from the cabinet, they said they were not aware of any pressure.
Thank you, Koga-san. We all are going to watch carefully March 27 appearance, and I hope you will make a historical appearance. Yes.
Hello, my name is Joël Lejean from RTL France and BFM Television. Thank you for coming. It is very difficult to understand what happened at the top of this society. I'm talking about the Kante and the Imperial Palace. It seems since January and recently a few days ago again that the Imperial family has raised some concerns about the history, the constitutions, the reform of the laws and things like that. So as you're Japanese and as you know your society very well, maybe you could explain us if what we understand as a battle between the palace and the Kante is real, or if it's just some kind of suppositions from the foreign media who have been sometimes said to be wrong. Thank you.
はい、フランスの RTF のテレビのものです。日本の、その上の方の状況についてお聞きしたいんですけれども、現在少し理解、海外の記者として理解しづらいというところ、その官邸の方で言われていること、そして天皇などがいろいろと発言されていることの違いについてですね、その1月もしくは最近にもその歴史認識ですとか、その歴史をどういうふうに考える、教えるのか、そして憲法の問題についてその中で少し違いというようなものがあるというふうに我々は見てるんですけれども、その中でもその官邸、そしてそちらの方との論争ですとかのそのバトルというようなものがあるというふうに我々海外のメディアが見てるんですけれども、そういったものが本当に存在しているのか、もしくは海外メディアがよくありがちなようなことが少しその状況を間違った方で判断しているのかについてぜひ教えてください。どなたでも。
よろしいですか。私はうちでテレビや新聞を見てるだけです。ネット情報に接するか、その3つから情報を得ています。ですから、内部の暗闘とかごたごたについては一切知りません。
And I would like to make a comment. Of course, my sources of information and media comes from, well, the television, the mainstream media, and the internet. So I do not have access, or I'm not basing this on any internal information.
しかし、たまたまですが、皇太子殿下の、誕生日の記者会見がありました。
However, of course, there was recently the press conference given on the time of the birthday of the Crown Prince.
日本国憲法に基づいて70年間の富と繁栄を享受した日本を大事にしてほしいというご趣旨の発言がありました。
And there was a comment given about wanting to value the prosperity which has been achieved in Japan based on 70 years of living under the current constitution.
ネットの中ではですね、この日本国憲法に触れる部分を NHK がカットして放送したことを怒っている人が随分いました。
And online, within different comments and so on the internet, there were many people who were very angry about the fact that NHK had cut some of the comments about the Constitution, which was given in this speech.
ネットのとても皮肉なユーザーの中には、NHK は皇太子殿下より安倍首相の方が大事なのかと皮肉ってる人もいました。
And there were people making ironic comments on the internet and so on, saying, well, the NHK is putting more value on what Prime Minister Abe is saying than on what the imperial family is saying.
自民党が現在提出している憲法改正案より、皇太子殿下のご発言に見られる皇室の方のお話の方がずっと現行憲法を大切になさっているということを感じている大勢の人がいるんだと私は考えます。
And I believe that if we compare the draft constitution which has been put forward or submitted by the Liberal Democratic Party with the statements which are coming from the palace in support or recognizing the importance or value of the current constitution, I think we can see many people concerned about or really seeing that the palace is placing much more value on the current constitution.
それが議論にならずにだんだんにならされていくっていうんでしょうか。私たちよく同調圧力という言葉を使いますが、いつの間にか変わっていくというような方向で変化する場合が日本の社会はあるかと思います。
However, I believe that, well, the fact that this is not so much being debated in a way and so on, there is a way that we can say, well, pressure being put to really bring things in line, shall we say, is something which is really at work in the way that the Japanese society is looking at this issue, bringing things in line with the way something should be officially rather than debating it concretely. そのバトルというものがあるというふうに思われます。
There is no battle because there are no weapons.
バトルがあるかないか。
そうですね。はい。
あるかもしれないしないかもしれない。
And well, perhaps there is, perhaps there isn't, is Mr. Imai's comment.
もともとこの問題を議論しようとしたら当然バトルがあってしかるべきなのに、バトルがない状態を内閣が作り出していることが大問題なの。
And I believe that what is the issue is this is something which should be debated and which should be brought as a battle and examined in this way. The fact that the cabinet is meaning or bringing this in a way such as there is no battle, there is debate about this, is what is the very problem at hand.
それは実際にバトルが行われているかどうかっていうのは、なかなかわからないと思うんですけれども、ただ観察をしていて気づくことはですね、天皇陛下や、天皇皇后両陛下やあるいは皇太子殿下、皆さんがですね非常に平和ということ、あるいは例えば原発の事故についての放射能の問題とかですね、そういうことに非常にはっきりと触れる場面が多いなというふうに、我々は感じるんですね。一般の日本国民はそういうふうに感じていることが多いと思うんですが、一方でそれが報道されるときにですね、どういうふうに報道されているかということを見ると、かなりの場面でですね、さっき中澤さんがおっしゃったような、政府批判と取られるかもしれないようなところがカットされて伝えられていると。で例えば、新年の、感想を述べたところでも、東日本大震災で大勢の人がまだ避難生活を送られているんですっていう時に、放射能汚染っていう言葉を天皇陛下は言っているのに絶対にそれを書かないというようなことが、実際に起きているんですね。でそれはマスコミが自重しているという面もありますけれども、おそらく安倍政権がそういうことは書かせたくないという意向があるので、宮内庁のいろいろなブリーフィングとかですね、あるいはいろんな官邸の記者クラブの人たちの圧力とか、そういうことで報道はそういうふうに曲げられていく。で曲げられていくってことは何かというとですね、天皇陛下がおっしゃっていることがそのまま伝えられることはまずいというですね、政府側の判断があるんだろうなと。そういう意味でもちろん安倍総理が天皇陛下にこんなことを言うなっていう、そんなことはありえないと思うんですけれども、そういうことではなくてですね、やはり政府としては天皇陛下がおっしゃっていることについて非常にアンカンフォタブルであるという状況はあって、それを直接それを否定しに行くとかですね、戦うということはできないけれども、メディアにどういうふうに報道されるかというところをコントロールすることによって、天皇陛下のお気持ちっていうのが曲げられて伝えられるというような、そういう意味ではバトルとは言えないかもしれないんですけれども、そういうことが起きているんじゃないかなというふうに、我々観察している側から見るとですね、見えるというふうなことだと思います。
In regards to whether there is an actual battle in place, I think this is something which is perhaps not clear, but one thing we can notice if we are observing the situation, for example, the comments which the emperor himself or also other members of the imperial family are saying. For example, I have the impression, and I think many other Japanese people also have the impression, that they are very often speaking about peace, or also even about the issue of radiation as a result of the nuclear disaster, for example. However, when we look at not so much what the comments are being made, but how this is being reported, and this is something which Ms. Nakazawa has also mentioned as well, many of the points which are critical of, or which could be interpreted as being critical of the government, can be cut from the way this is being reported, or the way the speech and statement and so on is reported on mainstream media. If we look, for example, at the greeting from the new year, we can see there was a very direct comment about the fact that many people are still living in evacuation. And the emperor used the words also referring to because of the radioactive contamination. However, in reality, this was cut from the mainstream media reporting his statements from the new year. And we can see this really happening. And so while, of course, it is impossible for Prime Minister Abe or the government to be directly giving any comments or restrictions on what the imperial family is commenting, of course, this is not what is happening. But when we look at the briefings which are being done from the government, for example, within the Cabinet Press Club and so on, we can see that there is ways where things which, if the emperor and other members of the imperial family had said were to be conveyed as is, could be problematic for the government. There is ways within the governmental briefings encouraging or controlling media to be reporting it in a certain way, or to be cutting out certain parts of statements and so on as well. So this is things which, of course, the Prime Minister cannot tell the emperor not to refer to, but which is uncomfortable for the government, for the Prime Minister. And so in this sense, of course, it's not possible to have a direct fight, and at the moment I would not say there is a direct battle as such, but the government is working to control the media in a way so that perhaps the words or the feeling of what the emperor is most trying to convey is not necessarily always reflected within much of the media. So I would not necessarily say this is a battle, but if we are observing the situation, we can see this very problematic situation.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. So questions, we can make other questions, but just one last comment for you, everybody, I would like to hear is on the lack of solidarity in Japan. Among you intellectuals, among you journalists, among you artists and novelists, we have a very recent case. Mr. Sugimoto, a photographer, has been taken away his passport. Now, if something of this extent would have happened in a European country like Italy, France, or many other countries, it would have been, big news, front news. There would be a lot of solidarity from the professional associations. We didn't see this in Japan. So could you, one by one, officially say if you are in solidarity with Mr. Sugimoto, if you support the fact that he was illegally stripped of his passport?
はい、でこれで質疑応答の方が最後になるんですけれども、私の方から最後に一つ皆さんにお一人ずつ答えていただきたい質問したいと思います。で日本の社会、そして日本の表現者、報道陣、言論陣などの中の、その連帯があんまりないということについて少し発言したいと思います。最近の杉本さんのパスポートが取り上げられたという件があったと思うんですけれども、こういった事件がもしヨーロッパ、例えばイタリアやフランスの方でもし起きたとしたら、もう本当に新聞などの大ニュース、一面のニュースになると思います。そしてそういった時に同業者やそしてその組織などからの連帯のメッセージも圧倒されると思うんですけれども、日本ではそういったことを全く、残念ながら見られなかったんですけれども、この場でぜひお一人ずつにその杉本さんに連帯を表明できるかどうかについてお一人ずつ最後にコメントをお願いいたします。
私からですか。杉本氏のパスポートが取り上げられた件に関しては、さっきの憲法の問題とも関わってくる部分がありまして、やり方はあまり好ましいやり方ではないと思っています。連帯っていう言葉の意味がうまくまだ消化できてなくて、私はジャーナリストではなくてフィクションの作家なので、私が連帯を表明しても杉本さんは嬉しいのかなとちょっと困惑しましたが。
In regards to the issue of Mr. Sugimoto's passport, I believe this is also a constitutional issue, and the way in which this was done was, of course, not a good way. However, I'm not sure exactly what you're implying with the word solidarity. I'm not myself a journalist. I'm a novelist of a different profession. I'm not sure whether Mr. Sugimoto would be, happy to have my words of solidarity as such in this case. So I'm not sure exactly what to say about that, but.
ジャーナリストの仕事の非常に尊い部分について連帯感を表明することはできます。
However, in regards to the role of journalists and their occupation and so on, I can't express my solidarity for the need for that.
Thank you.
はい。ですね、私もこの問題について特に本当に詳しい情報を持っているわけではないんですけれども、やはりジャーナリストはですね、危険な地域に入って、そこで政府にとって都合のいいことも悪いことも含めて報道してくれるっていうことがですね、我々が正しい判断をする上で書くことができないものだと思うんですね。ですからそういう行動っていうのは非常に尊いので、それを簡単に制限するということはやってはいけないと思います。大学生が観光旅行でそこに行くというのであればやめた方がいいよということを政府が言うのはいいと思いますけれども、ジャーナリストはですね、自分の責任において、本当に伝えたいというものがあってですね、そこに入っていくということを簡単に止めるのかということで言えば、それはそんな簡単にやっちゃいけないことだというふうに思いますので、私は杉本さんを含めてそういう、なかなか普通の人が知れないような真実を伝えようという努力をする方に対しては連帯の気持ちを示したいと思います。
I do not have detailed information about the specific case, but of course, if we look at the importance of journalists to be able to go into areas which are considered dangerous and report back information about what is really happening there, whether it is for the advantage or disadvantage of the government, this is something which is absolutely necessary for citizens to be able to make their own judgments. And simply restricting this in such a simple way as was done in this case is not something which should occur. Of course, if it was an issue of a university student going there for holiday, perhaps that would be a different issue. But looking at a journalist going there to report on something important at their own responsibility, this is something which should not be stopped in such a simple way as well. And so in this sense, I can express solidarity with Mr. Sugimoto and others who are working to tell the truth and report on these kinds of situations that this right should be in place there.
はい、私、大阪大学の教員でもあるので、私はこれ、古賀さんとは意見が若干異なるかもしれませんが、維新の会が大阪府、大阪市の市長、府知事の選挙に勝利したときに、大阪はレジスタンスの時代に入ったと申し上げました。
I am a professor at the university in Osaka, and so perhaps I have somewhat a different opinion from Mr. Koga, but at the time when the Ishin no Kai, the Restoration Party, was successful in the positions of mayor and governor within the Osaka city and prefecture, I mentioned that Osaka was going into a period of resistance.
レジスタンスにおいて重要なのは信頼と連帯です。
And what is important in times of resistance is trust and solidarity.
異なる立場、異なる意見、先ほど今井さんからもご紹介があったように、この署名に参加したくてもある状況において参加できない方たちもいらっしゃいました。そういう方たちとも連帯をするということが重要だと思います。
And in this case, being able to, well, if we look at the case of Mr. Imai mentioned people who wanted to sign on to the declaration, but for various circumstances were not able to. I believe it is important to show solidarity, to express solidarity in such cases, including with people of different positions, different opinions also.
今重要なのは自民党内にもいるだろう良心的な勢力、公明党の皆さん、そして広く社会民主主義的な勢力まで含めて中道の人々が大きく声を上げて連帯をしていくことだと思っています。
And what is of great importance now is finding the people within the LDP, within Komeito, who surely do exist with good consciences, and within the broader social democratic movement also, and ensuring they can raise their voices, they can express this, and showing solidarity in this, I believe, is very important now.
私たちは冷戦時代の右か左かという議論をしているのではなくて、ここで議論しているのは民主主義の根幹である言論の自由、表現の自由を守るかどうかという基本的なことを問うているわけですから、ここでは広く連帯が可能だと私は考えています。
And of course, we are not now discussing issues of, right or left as within the Cold War times, but we are looking at the fundamental rights, the fundamental issues of freedom of expression. And in that sense, I believe it's possible and important to express very broad solidarity in that respect.
Thank you. 私はこの間のジャーナリストの、あれを政府がね、いろいろと、何ですか、パスポートもね、取り上げかねないような発言をしたのは間違いだと思いますね。もうこの国はね、ジャーナリストだけでも、もう自己犠牲、自己責任ということすらもできない時代になってますね。これは皆さんご存知の通り、後藤さんはビデオで喋ってますね。自分がもし捕まっちゃったら自己責任だから、シリアの人たちも悪く言わないでくれ、それから自分の責任は自分で責任取るんでと、死を覚悟したようなビデオが流れました。でもあのビデオなぜ流れたかって、私ずっと変だなと思ってたんです。政府の方が、安倍政権があれを流すことによって政府にはね、間違いはないということを言いたくて、あえてあれを引っ張り出してきて、ほら自己責任なんだから政府は問題ねえだろと言いたかったのが、なかなか世の中そうはいかなくなってきたもんだから、その結果不幸な結末を迎えたということですね。でその後に新潟のジャーナリストの問題、今度は自己責任になって、当時盛んに言われてたんですから、自己責任だったら本人がね、生命が危険だろうが何だろうが生かせたらいいわけですよ。ところがここで一番言いたいことは、ジャーナリストでさえもそうなんですから、一般の国民たち、もう自分たちのね、自主性というものがもうないんですね。自己責任も何もあったもんじゃなくて、全て国が管理しているっていう状態がもう出来上がりつつあるということに、私はものすごい危惧を感じています。
In regards to this case, I believe that it was very wrong, or the government should not be able to confiscate or prevent a journalist from traveling in such a way, take his passport away. And I believe this really brings us to the issue of jiko sekinin, or the self-responsibility, which is being talked about so much, and yet it's come to a position, a situation where people cannot even take responsibility. They're not even allowed to take responsibility for themselves. If we look at the video of Mr. Goto, which was released, in which he clearly said that he was traveling on his own responsibility and not to criticize his supporters or his colleagues if anything were to happen for him. I felt very strange and was wondering about why it was that this video was actually being made public or screened and so on. And when we consider this from the government's perspective, well, Prime Minister Abe, if this video was being shown, well, it would say, well, he's going at his own responsibility, jiko sekinin, which means that there is no wrong play or no responsibility there on the government's side. However, it did not actually go like this, and as a result, well, of course, this situation did end in a very tragic way. However, when we look at the situation of the Niigata journalist, even if he is saying that he is going on his own responsibility, and even if there is criticism or pushing of journalists in this way about the sekinin, their jiko sekinin, their self-responsibility, well, if that's the case, then he should be allowed to go at his own responsibility. And so I want to say that we're at the situation now where not even journalists, but also private individuals, Japanese citizens, they have no self-agency, self-ability to be able to do this, and everything is being controlled in this way by the government.
私は1980年に当時ソ連の支配下にあったポーランドで、それこそソリダルノシチ、日本語で連帯ですよね、が誕生して、自由を求めて運動が起こりました。しかし翌年、ソ連の圧力もあって弾圧されて、スタンボエンニっていうんですけども、戦時体制になりました。でジャーナリストが全く入れない状態で、私はパリで国際学生証を偽造して、学生であるかのようにしてワルシャワに入って、半年間ワルシャワの学生寮で暮らしながら取材を続けてたんですけども、警察に見つかって、拘束されました。そこまでます。
In 1980, in the former Soviet Union, or at the time of the Solidarity movement in Poland, when there was a movement calling for freedom, and so in the following year after this, there was pressure on this from the government, and it became a situation where journalists were not allowed to enter at all. At that time, I myself actually made a fake international or fake student card in Paris and entered Warsaw myself, and I spent 6 months in a student's dormitory in Warsaw reporting about the situation there. However, I was found and detained by the police.
で私がやったことは、刑務所にぶち込まれてたレフ・バウエンサーをはじめとするリーダーたちの刑務所での写真を入手して、それを西側のメディアに、例えばウィーンとかあるいはミュンヘンから流して、またワルシャワに戻るということをやってたんですが、結局3回拘束されました。そしてそのたんびに国外退去処分になったんですが、すべてそれこそジャーナリストとしてのスピリッツで、自分が殺されようが刑務所にぶち込まれようが全然構わないということで仕事を続けてきて、それは日本の私の同業者はほとんどそういう精神で、特にフリーランスの人はそういう精神で仕事を続けていると思っています。
And at that time, I was, for example, obtaining photographs of the leader of the movement, Lech Walesa, who was detained or in jail at the moment, obtaining photographs of these and going and releasing these to the media in the West, for example, in Vienna or Munich, and then returning to Warsaw after this and going back and forth. I was detained in Poland 3 times, and each time sent out of the country. But at the time, it didn't matter to me what would happen if I were to be jailed or even killed. It was within the journalistic spirit that I continued to do this. And I believe at the time also shared within my journalist colleagues, particularly within freelancers, this was very much the same for all of us.
大切な問題は、さっき平田織田さんがおっしゃったみたいに、この署名に参加していない人とも連帯しなくちゃいけないし、フリーランスとそれから会社に所属している人たち、どちらかというと仲があまり良くない、要するに記者クラブで仕事をしている人と記者クラブに入れない私たち、もちろん僕は入りたいわけじゃないんだけども、つまり記者クラブにしか認められてない取材が私たちにはできない、そういうこともあって非常に 垣根があります。でも今大事なことは、その垣根を取っ払って、言論人、報道人、表現者が一つになって、誰かが古賀さんみたいな周知、あるいは杉本さんみたいな周知が行われたときに、それこそデネスストライキの精神で、私たちみんなが、それこそテレビのコメンテーターが一人飛ばされたら、俺もこのテレビに出ない、私も出ない、そういう精神が今、この日本のジャーナリズムに求められていると思います。誰かがクビになったら、今度俺がクビになるからって言って、口をつぐむんじゃなくって、誰かが降ろされたら、もうその瞬間、私たちは全部このコメンテーターを降りると、そういうふうな精神が、みんながそういう行動を取らない限り、この悪しき流れにストップをかけることはできないと私は思っています。
Yes, I believe that what is important, as Mr. Hirata Oriza has also mentioned as well, is showing solidarity not only with those of us who are signing on to the statement, but those who for various reasons are not able to sign on to such a declaration, whether they are freelancers or working within companies, whether they are members of the press club or those who cannot join, or like us, or well, not that we would perhaps want to. It is important to go beyond as writers, as journalists, as artists together. And if there is a case like what happened to Mr. Koga, like what happened to Mr. Sugimoto, we need to all show solidarity in this way. For example, saying, well, if one person is being removed from a program, is being fired from this, then we will all step down. We will all strike, for example. If one person is being fired, then I will also refuse to appear as a commentator on any of these programs as well. And unless we are able to have everybody to be able to take such steps together, I believe that it will be impossible or perhaps very difficult to put a stop to the dangerous direction we are now heading in.
Thank you very much. Sorry to have prolonged this session, but I believe that at the end we got a very strong commitment and statement, and we are all very happy about this. So let me... oh, yes, you want to... Oh, yeah, yes, sure. This is the homepage
皆さんに配れてないので申し訳ないんですけども、ホームページを立ち上げました。他でいいんだよね。はい、それで、ここにアクセスしていただければ、声明文とかですね、賛同者とかの名前が見れるのと、それから今ですね、表現者がいろんなことができる人たちが署名していただいているので、その方々にですね、その今の自分たちの気持ちをですね、それぞれの得意分野で表していただく、パフォーマンスをですね、やっていただいて、それをリンクをしていくというキャンペーンをやろうと思っています。今もうサンプルが出ていると思いますが、例えばマッド・アマノさんの風刺画のようなですね、ものとかですね、いろんな歌や音楽、そういうことも含めてですね、あるいは我々のようにペンで書いていくというようなことも含めて、そういうキャンペーンをしていきたいというふうに思っていますので、皆さんぜひご覧いただくのと拡散をしていただければと思います。よろしくお願いします。
And finally, I would like to share some information. Unfortunately, we were not able to include this in the papers distributed, but we have recently launched a website, and this is the URL for the website. If you access this, you can see the full text of the declaration and also the list of signatories. And not only this, we are also about to launching now a campaign for all of the different writers, journalists, and artists who are involved in this campaign to, through their own field, through their own means of expression, whether performance, writing, music, in the case of Mad Amano through parody and so on, show their expressions or opinions about this situation at the moment as well. So I hope that you can check this website and also help us to share this information too. Thank you.
Okay, as I was about to say before, on behalf of the Foreign Correspondent Club, thank you very, very much for coming today, and as a token of our gratitude, but also of our interest of having people like you joining us, this is a one-year honorary membership card. So you can come here, take your friends. Of course, honorary doesn't mean that you have the free dinner or whatever, but you don't have to pay the dues. So, Imai-san, Amado-sensei, Hirata-san, Koga-sensei. So thank you very much, and let's finish it here.